you were central to the campaign to try to get Eric out of hospital. Why did he not get out of hospital?
Well, it's quite complicated. Who would ever know getting out of hospital was so difficult? Because you or I, we could sign ourselves out of hospital any time if we went in for some reason, you would think. But they have these things called DOLs, deprivation of liberty orders, and MCA, mental capacity assessment, that literally they can just apply quite randomly and oftentimes get approval for it by, I believe the mental capacity assessment has to be signed by 2 doctors, but it's at least 1 doctor has to sign it. Can't be just a nurse.
Was that the case?
Well, this is it. I kept asking for this certificate. If an MCA certificate exists, he wants to see it. And every time I asked for it, they ignored me. I put it in writing to the doctor, to the nurse, to David Probert, the head of the hospital. I put it to the complaints department. I put it to the PALS people. I put it to Keir Starmer, to Steve Barclay, the head of health and social care. I put it to NICE, National Institute for Excellence in Healthcare, something about healthcare. So there's people there that advocate for rights for the elderly. Also, there's a division of the Macmillan Charity. I sent it to their person who has written extensively. Anybody that's written about elderly rights over the past 5 years, I've found them and written to them to intervene and help. Well, I haven't gotten anything from any of them. The biggest help came from Jackie Devoy, who made the video A Good Death, and Stuart Wilkie, whose 2 parents were killed in the hospital. So he was featured in Jackie's documentary. So Stuart very kindly was giving me information and telling me what to look for and what they do and how to head them off and how to go around it. But do you know, one of the Assange group team, Jamie, was in Spain making all of the phone calls to 20, 25, 30 different law firms that know about medical law, that know about the Court of Protection. I don't know if you know that, but there's a court called the Court of Protection that deals with DOLs and mental capacity assessment certificates. So my plan was to get another doctor to go in there and override it so that doctor could say he's mentally sound and I discharge him now. So that doctor came, and that doctor said there's no reason why he shouldn't be discharged. But he said that he didn't agree he should go home. He said he'd become so malnourished and dehydrated and was so weak that he should go to a 24-hour care nursing facility to recuperate. And then they would have the opportunity to send him home. So that one little hitch basically set us back from taking him out of there. Because when we arrived with people to take him out, we were told by Eric that he didn't want to go home because his friend, the doctor, had told him that he shouldn't go home because he wouldn't get the care he needed, and we could then be responsible and criminally prosecuted if we had removed him from hospital against medical orders and he had died in our care, So everybody has to think a little bit about this before you just rip somebody out of hospital. So when somebody is so frail and 94 years old, you can't have a tug of war at the front door of the hospital with the security guard. Well, they said that this was a vulnerable ward because it was the elderly. But guess what they did? People were so vulnerable in there that they moved all the overflow from the COVID ward downstairs up into the elderly ward. Now, how does that make sense? If their goal of keeping visitors out was only 1 visitor a day for 1 hour, they finally agreed and reopened it to visiting. But then they move in a whole truckload of COVID actively infected, so they say. PCR testing, who knows who was infected with what. But I said, how does that logic work? That these people are so vulnerable and you're so worried about them, you don't allow visitors, but you do allow a huge influx of newly infected COVID patients. That you've turned this into a new COVID ward just next to the most vulnerable ward in the whole hospital. Well, I don't make the rules, was their answer. The nurse. I said, the head nurse, I said, you are a medical professional. You have a medical opinion about this. You are responsible for protecting the patients, and you're not doing it. You're letting this happen, but yet you're telling visitors we can't visit. Now, Dr. Harvey, who was Eric's doctor, she said she agreed that long-term stays did not always end well, that they saw that the patients recovered much better having a short stay in hospital and then leaving and going home.
That's been the general principle.
Of course. So she didn't deny it. And I said, we can feed him better. We can look after him with friends he wants to be with. He can be in his familiar surroundings. He can have his things around him. He can have his phone calls. He's got a garden. You know, all the things will help rehabilitation. But every week it was a different story. She told us he had pneumonia, he had fluid on the lung. Every week it was a different story. And then he was in a quarantine because there was COVID in the ward. Every week it was changing the goalpost. And I said this to her. One of them did, and then the others said, he doesn't have COVID. They said, how would you be allowed to visit if he had COVID? If he had COVID, he would be in isolation and he would not be allowed any visitors. But he's been having visitors, and we've not been told not to book him any visitors. They told me it was 2 till 7, one person for 1 hour. So whoever came during that period, they had to be booked in. You couldn't just turn in. And the rub of it was they never answered the phone for bookings. So unless you could get up there and get past the security guards to the 10th floor, where it was the only floor in the whole hospital where they had a security guard out there every hour of the day to stop people going in to visit their loved ones. Everybody had to have a fight with these animals.
Other people complaining as well, right?
Absolutely. There was at the door, and guess what? They're all subcontracted. They're mighty employment agency workers. And they hire a particular worker. All the NHS security workers are from Mighty, M-I-T-E. This is a huge pen of evil security people. They're all the kind of people that don't think there's anything wrong with shoving people and restricting their rights. Because a lot of them have come from places, and they've told me this themselves, have come from places where they didn't experience freedom growing up themselves.
Yeah.
So for some reason, they're choosing a large number of those people so that the way they enforce the laws of the NHS, they don't question, is this right or wrong? They just go like pack animals after you, because like any good dictatorship, you can't be successful unless you've got the military. So the NHS doctors, if we questioned the doctor or the woman in the reception area that was booking the appointments, they'd immediately call security to have us thrown out. It was like a zero tolerance policy in there. They were just like, if we don't go along with it, we'll be banned from visiting, we'll be restricted. Then when he was nil by mouth, and they told me,
what does that mean?
Nil by mouth means he can't have anything, no fluids, no liquid, no food. Well, that's what I said. I walked in and I fed him every day. I brought him food or fed him myself personally if nobody else was booked in and it was my day. But this day I was in to see him and I brought the food with me, so I always set it down on the food. I brought loads of liquids, high nutrition foods, and fed him. Took me an hour, sometimes 2. And this day in particular, I said to them, I see there's a sign up on the wall. It says NBM. What does that mean? And the nurse got kind of panicky and said, oh, I'll send someone in to talk to you. So I went in, and not even 2 minutes, 3 minutes later, the doctor and the head nurse, her henchmen, were up there. And the two of them rushed into the room and told me I'd have to leave the room. I said, why? And they said, oh, we have to adjust Eric's position and change him. And so I said, I can stay here. I've changed him many times. There's nothing wrong with that. He's fine about me being here. But he was knocked out cold. I mean, this guy, I do reflexology on his feet when I go there. I pinched his foot that he usually jumps at, pinched it so hard, he didn't even flinch. He was just like cold, out of it. And so she's like, we're going to move him and change him and whatever. I said, he's not even awake. You know, what are you having to do this now for?
When was this?
This was on Tuesday this past week. So I said, I want to know why he's on nil by mouth. I said, this man is emaciated. He's dehydrated. He's malnourished under your care for the past 13 weeks. And you know what she said? She said, well, he was a very complicated admission. I said, complicated admission? He was walking when he came into the hospital. He had a knock to the head, so the building sent him just to make sure that he wasn't bleeding internally or nothing was wrong with him. But that's it. He didn't come here for anything else except they sent him as a preventative measure because he got a knock on the head when some builders came into his flat, and he stepped back out of the way into the doorway to the kitchen when he let them in.
They supposedly discovered lots of other things when he was there.
Well, he had gone one time previous because he had a big house move. So he moved from one place that he'd been at for 47 years or 50 years, and he moved down the street, not far, but still it was totally new, and he was really distressed about should he move, shouldn't he move. He wanted to stay in independent housing, and I'd found him a place in sheltered accommodation. So he was really not knowing, and he wasn't sleeping well, and he wasn't eating. He was getting himself so worked up. And he told me he fell out of bed one day because he hadn't slept. And so I said, well, do you feel like you're injured? And he said, well, I feel like my shoulder's sore. And I said, okay, well, maybe you should go to the hospital then if you think you need to be looked at, because I don't know how badly you've hurt yourself. So he did take an ambulance to the hospital, and at that point was when they had diagnosed him for the first time since he was vaccinated in December. And they decided in March, for the first time, for whatever reason, he suddenly had heart inflammation and he had a blood clot. Now, he'd never had these things before. The blood clot, I think, was on the lung, but they said it was moving. So I don't know where it was first diagnosed. I can't pretend to know that. But when I heard about it, there was something around the lung, I was told. It didn't say in, but they said it was around, and they wanted to break it up, and they were giving him these blood thinners. So that was the first time he'd ever had prescription medication. He'd been to the GP every year, all his life, twice a year, going to see this guy that was local. And they'd never told him he had anything wrong with him. So for the first time, he gets diagnosed in March as having these issues and shortness of breath. So when he was there and then he came back to his new flat and he moved in, these builders came, he had to move out of the way, and his pajamas were too big because he'd lost weight, so he stepped on the cuff and just slipped and went backwards and hit his head. So that was why he went into hospital. So I told the doctor, you know, are you proud of yourself, what you've done to him, and now you're trying to finish him off with do not nil by mouth.
The news was full of stuff about Monday and Tuesday being the hottest days in the
That's right.
world. What was it like in the hospital?
There's no air conditioning there, and there's no windows that open. So you basically bake like you're in an oven, but they have something that circulates the air, some kind of fan system that circulates, but there's no breeze that blows on you.
What temperature was it inside the hospital?
Oh, I would say it had to at least be about 80, maybe 82 or so. You know, I'm quite tolerant to heat, so I can't say, oh, it was 95. It might have been. They actually had a heater going on his feet because they said his circulation to his extremities wasn't good, and he had cold feet. So whenever I was there, I would just take the blanket off him because I thought it was counterintuitive. But on that day that was the hottest day in the year, they still had this heater going. Yes, it is bizarre. And I asked her, I said, and she said she was going to call security. And I said, you will have to justify this to other people because this doesn't end here. You will have complaints filed against you. And you may not think you're accountable, but you will be. And she just said, oh, I don't have to listen to this. This was always her answer, that I was not his next of kin, a family member, so that she didn't have to answer any questions. Well, they had talked to his daughter in Canada, and 10,000 miles away, she doesn't know what's going on, but they told her that the reason they put him on nil by mouth was because he had a problem swallowing food, so they wanted to make sure he didn't choke. I fed that man every day and he ate like a horse. The one meal a day that he ate like a horse was with me, and I gave him fresh squeezed orange juice. I gave him a Huel nutrition drink every day. He loved his orange Lucozade. So more hydration, and I brought distilled water with minerals from home.
Were they feeding him via tube?
There was no food via tube, no. There was only sodium chloride by tube, and it was on a very slow drip. And they were giving him by tube paracetamol. Now, we all know how dangerous paracetamol is. Every time I was there and I caught them trying to give him more paracetamol, I would say to them, why do you keep trying to give him paracetamol? He's not in pain. And I'd say to him, Eric, are you in pain? And he'd say no. And they'd ask him, do you want some paracetamol? And he'd look at me and then he'd say no. And I'd say, that's okay to say no if you don't want it, Eric. You don't have to look to me. You should know. If you don't feel pain, just tell her, I don't feel pain, so I don't want it. Paracetamol is not good for you. Paracetamol kills people. It dehydrates you, it constipates you, and it screws up your kidneys. All the combination of their malpractice that they performed on him sunk the boat at the end of the day. And bedbound. He told me every day to get him out of bed to go to the bathroom. He wanted to walk. He knew they were weakening him. He begged me to get the police to come there. The police wouldn't come. He begged me to get them to say that they were giving him drugs to weaken him. And we really tried everything. I can't tell you how hard it was. Maybe he should have just been ripped out of there, but I tell you, to be honest, I don't think he would have survived the stress with a weak heart and with how thin he was and how fragile he was.
Maybe, like you're saying, had he gone home, he would have died straight away anyway.
It's possible.
It's the right to decide yourself.
Exactly. That's the whole point. If he wants to go home and he signs a form that says, I understand if any medical complications occur because I've left against medical advice to go to my own home, then I absolve everyone of responsibility.
Such a paper was not signed or...
Well, I had the paper for him. And I had the paper that said his friend, the doctor, could access his medical records, and the paper that said I could view those medical records as well. But he didn't want to go home, so he didn't want to sign the paper.
Under those circumstances.
Yeah.
And why didn't he want to go home again? What was the argument?
He said that his doctor, his friend, the doctor that had examined him the day before, had said he shouldn't go home, he should go to a 24-hour care facility. Yeah, the Jewish care facility was deemed to be a very good choice. I had called social care services, his social workers, to try numerous times. By the way, he was very let down by social workers. His social workers literally wouldn't talk to me after they knew me from the building and had met me and had met his daughter when she was visiting in April. And the new social worker that was covering Eric was in hospital. So the social worker in Camden, they both work for Camden Council, but the Camden social worker said she was only able to work with Eric when he was out of hospital. While he was in hospital, it had to be 100% his social worker, Josie, at UCH, and she totally let him down, and I told her that. I called her every week, sometimes several times a week. I wrote emails to her telling her what was going on every week, and that they were killing him, and that she had to safeguard him. And she just sometimes wouldn't even reply, and sometimes I would have to finally get her on the phone and she would answer, and she would yell at me for calling her, telling me that she couldn't tell the doctors what to do. They know what they're doing, she told me.
It seems to be a litany of failures,
yes,
bureaucratic mismanagement.
The social care system let him down. They didn't protect him, so I was having to run around. Keith was running around. Jamie, his friend, the doctor, we're all having to run around and do the job to try and protect him from the killer doctors who are coming for his head, it seems, because putting him on nil by mouth when he's below weight on the hottest day of the year, and he's already dehydrated. He woke up once while I was there on Tuesday, and he was like, I had been squeezing his feet and shaking his shoulder and talking to him in his ear, Eric, Eric. He opened one eye and he couldn't, the other eye had been damaged. I don't even know how. I said to them, how has he damaged his eye? I don't know. I'd come in the morning, there'd be blood all over his sheets, and I'd say, how has he been bleeding in the night? He's got bed sores all over him. Why are you taking such bad care? And I had asked them these questions many times. So I woke him up, I was squeezing his feet. He woke up and he looked at me, and his one eye was so wide, and he just turned to me, he grabbed my hand, and with the other hand he was pointing to his mouth and was opening his mouth to put something in there. And so I said to him, Eric, you know, because they wouldn't let me stay in there with the door open. The nurse was right outside the door at the desk watching everything I did in there. So he's asking me to give it, and I said, Eric, they're telling me that I can't give you any food or drink. It is nonsense, because I feed you every day. You don't have any throat problem. You don't have any problem swallowing. You swallow fine. Yes, well, you see if you watch Jackie's documentary, they were just crying, tears down their face. They said my mom was sitting there begging me for water, and we're putting a sponge to her lips. Yeah. And telling her, no, Mom, you can't have any water because the doctors say that you'll harm yourself if you have water. We can't give you anything because of your condition. They thought they were helping her to heal. They weren't told, you know, that they're killing her by doing this, but in essence, that's what they were doing. She said, I think this one in the film was 55 years old, and they're telling the daughter and her husband that she's dying, and they're like, dying? She came in here because she had an infection, and for whatever reason they targeted her and gave her the injections. They gave her midazolam, put her on the end of life Liverpool care pathway, and no water, no food, and they had to sit there and watch this woman die for nothing. It's just shocking, but as we talked about before, all of this, if anybody thinks this is too extreme for them to believe, you can go online and get the NHS document. There's a document called Palliative Care Funding Review 2010. And in this document, it's created by, what a surprise, the people at King's College for at that time, the current health minister, I can't remember the name, but it was outlining the path from 2010 to 2030. It's the 20-year plan. So basically, we're just over halfway through the plan now. So in it identifies two things that should worry anyone. there are incentives, that means money, incentives to people in any aspect of the NHS to identify to the palliative care teams people that should be on palliative care or will soon be on palliative care, because the earlier they can identify these people, the lower the cost of the death will be and the faster it will happen, so that the system will not have that burden for a long death. Okay, so it doesn't stop there though. The next one is there is a tariff put on that person's head. As soon as somebody identifies and gets their incentive for identifying somebody that should be on palliative care and some kind of end-of-life pathway very soon, then there's a tariff put on their head, and that tariff follows them everywhere. Whether it's your GP, whether it's a nursing home, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a clinic, they all know that you've got this tariff on your head. The incentives, they're never so crass to put a pound figure on it, like how much money it's worth, but they say that you will get either facilities or extra staff or expand your clinic or wages will go up or something from these tariffs. So everybody, whoever cashes in the tariff, their department gets the bonanza. So, and this is, nobody can dispute it. This is written. This is their blueprint, what they follow. And if you talk to them, they say, for example, Dr. came up to me the second week Eric was in hospital and told me to sit down, and she said, I have some very bad news. Eric is coming to the end of his life. And I said, Eric is 94. In anybody's book, he would be coming to the end of his life. Can you be a bit more specific what you're talking about? He's very sick. What's he so sick with that you think he's at the end of his life now? And she said, well, his heart's very weak. And I said, well, so you think he's going to be dead this week or what? And she said, well, it could be 3 days, 3 months, or 3 years. And I said, precisely. So what are you having this conversation with me? She wanted palliative care to begin. She wanted end-of-life care. She wanted end-of-life care. I said, what do you mean? You want to kill him? Is that what you're telling me? And she stood up and she said, I think this meeting is over. I said, no, it's not. I want to know why you think he's going to be dead in 3 weeks or 3 days or 3 years. Just the weak heart, that's it. You don't have any particular sign that shows you something that it's imminent. The NHS seems to be sewn up with lawyers and security guards and doctors who can function above any kind of scrutiny. I think it must be impossible to get fired from the NHS even if you kill people. And for people that just can't believe this, I'm telling you, watch it if you have elder friends or relatives, or if you're an elder and you go in, because you will see all of these things that I've outlined being done to your parents. Anybody over the age of 60 starts getting a scorecard, and they rate you by your health, your activity, whether you're retired, whether you have family members close by, whether you're all alone in the world, whether you have mental health issues, and they target people. It's as simple as that. It's dollars and cents. And
it's 11:43. You're under arrest for breach of code regulations. Disgraceful. Okay, necessity to prevent harm to the public, protect our public health. Okay, you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. If you don't mention when questioned, something is below lining 4.
He must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling. He keeps on rolling along. He don't plant potatoes, he don't plant cotton. Them that plants them is soon forgotten, but old man River, he just keeps rolling along. You and me, we sweat and strain, body all aching and racked with pain, tote that barge, lift that bale, show a little grit, and your land's in jail. But I keep laughing instead of crying. I must keep fighting until I'm dying. And Old Man River, he'll just keep rolling.